men sent by their father, the sun god, to found an empire on Earth died out 500 years ago. But the glory of their civilization has lived on until today as a legacy of its grandeur. In the early 15th century, the Incas set out to create the most powerful empire ever seen in South America. A military and religious state that was so highly organized that today it still sparks admiration amongst historians who continue to look for answers to the many questions yet to be resolved about the Incas. Who were the Incas? Where did they originate? From the time they first appeared as a wandering tribe, lost in the immensity of the Andes, to when they had shaped the land into a vast empire that held sway over most of South America, the Incas had been shrouded in mystery. They knew neither the art of writing nor the use of the wheel, and never made contact with peoples beyond the Andes. But even so, the Incas, from their base in the center of the most rugged terrain on Earth, created a wealthy and fair society that at its peak governed more than 10 million inhabitants. Tradition has it that there were 14 great rulers who succeeded one another in the complex task of forging the Inca Empire, the Tawantinsuyo. Ranging from Manco Capac, the founder of the empire, to Atahualpa, the last of the emperors, the Incas ranked amongst one of the fastest growing civilizations on Earth. But just as quickly as they rose to power, their fall was just as sudden. Within the space of 100 years, the Incas conquered all the armies that dared challenge them, but collapsed like a pack of cards at the hands of a tiny band of conquerors who sailed here from the other side of the world. Who were these people who were such superb architects, so skilled in the arts of war, and so devout in their worship of the sun god? Discover the magic and the mysteries of the Incas as we explore their history and tour their extraordinary capital city, which they believed to be the center of the earth. The most commonly told legend about the origin of the Incas has it that the sun god felt pity for mankind. He sent his children, Manco Capac and Mama Ocllo, down to earth to found a great empire and teach men the techniques of farming, livestock herding, and weaving. The divine couple were both husband and wife and brother and sister, received a golden scepter with which they would found an empire on the spot where it sank into the soil. They set out from the shores of Lake Titicaca further south and wandered the earth for many years in search of the promised land, until one day the scepter sank into the ground on top of Mount Guanacauri, a hill near the valley of Cusco. So they halted here, and Manco Capac chose this region to found a fabulous kingdom that was to dominate the Andes. Peruvian writer Inca Garcilaso de la Vega was the first to write down this legend in 1615 in his book, The Royal Commentaries of the Incas. While it is a striking tale, historians believe that rather than stemming from a genuine Andean tradition, the story was Garcilaso's literary creation, designed to lend his Inca ancestors an aura of mystery that would be attractive for European readers. I fear that the myth of Manco Capac and Mama Ocllo was made up by Garcilaso because he thought it made a good tale to have a founding couple. Garcilaso argued that no cultures existed before the Incas, but we now know this wasn't the case. In my opinion, the myth of the Ayar brothers is a much more Andean tradition. Some 65 kilometers south of the valley of Cusco, in the middle of a chilly Andean landscape, lies a hill which features 4 oddly shaped fissures running through the rock. It is called Tamputoco. At the base of the hill lies an enormous boulder which has been laboriously carved with seats and platforms that were typical of the Inca era. This is the scenario of a legend that boasts no author, but which was transmitted from generation to generation by the Incas' descendants. The myth of the Ayar brothers. Legend has it that these mysterious fissures saw the birth of 4 powerful brothers, accompanied by their wives. These men had magic powers. One of them could fly, and another could shake the hills with his slingshot. When they emerged from this grotto, Ayar Manco, Ayar Uchu, Ayar Cachi, and Ayar Auca, the 4 brothers, set out on an epic trek to the valley of Cusco. While they proved their bravery and skills, 3 of the brothers fell by the wayside, and Ayar Manco alone made it to Cusco to take possession of the lands where he founded the Inca Empire. This tale is a favorite amongst historians who have studied the birth of this civilization, because it mentions places that still exist today and which are still venerated by the inhabitants of Cusco. However, the true origin of the Incas remains shrouded in the mists of time. One thing, however, is clear from these 2 tales. The Incas were not originally from Cusco and only came here after undertaking a long voyage. Most researchers believe the Incas did not come from Cusco originally, but rather came from elsewhere. Some academics believe they were originally from the Puquina tribe. Others believe they were Aymara speakers, and yet others claim the Incas were Quechua speakers, but are not clear on which dialect of Quechua. The Spanish chroniclers wrote that the Incas came and spent several years in different parts of the country, hunting for fertile lands where they could establish themselves. But just how was this small group, which came here from somewhere else in the Andes, able to take over the best lands and then dominate the neighboring tribes until they formed an empire? Of all the Inca rulers, there was one who dreamed of a greater destiny for his people. When he came to power, the modest villages of Cusco were to be transformed into a civilization that would leave its mark on history. Cusco was the capital of the Tawantinsuyo, from a spiritual, economic, and even religious point of view. Together with their families and the nobility, the Inca rulers lived here throughout the duration of the empire. It was from here that the imperial armies set out to conquer the four corners of the world and spread their brand of sun worship. It is said that one of the first concerns of Inca ruler Pachacutec, after conquering the warring Chanca tribe, was to completely remodel Cusco, which at the time was just a rustic village made up of simple houses that dotted the hills above Cusco. Pachacutec designed the new city in the shape of a great Puma mountain lion, the sacred deity of the Andean peoples. From its foundation, the city was divided into two clearly defined sectors. The lower part, called Jurin Cusco, and the upper part, or Hanan Cusco. The fortress of Sacsayhuaman, built many years later, was to round off the definitive silhouette of the city, shaped like a feline. Using Cusco as a base, the Incas set out to conquer all the neighboring lands. And as the empire grew, it was divided up into four provinces or administrative regions that they called suyus. The Chinchay Suyu to the northwest, the Coya Suyu to the southeast, down past Lake Titicaca, the Conti Suyu to the west, down to the coast, and the Antisuyo, the region of the mysterious Antis or Chunchos tribes who dwelled in the jungle. These four suyus made up the Tawantinsuyo, the center of which was Cusco. During the rule of Pachacutec, Cusco rose to become a major metropolis with more than 100,000 inhabitants. The well-laid-out streets, squares, and palaces were admired by visitors who came from all over the empire. But it is said that the Coricancha temple truly inspired awe amongst pilgrims. The Spanish chroniclers claimed Pachacutec Inca Yupanqui had this temple built to honor the sun god. The temple was adorned with so many gold and silver ornaments that the people called the temple the Coricancha, which in the Quechua language means the golden chamber. The temple was located in Jurin, Cusco, where today the Church of Santo Domingo stands. Its walls were carved from stone, which rose to a certain height before being capped off by adobe mud bricks, topped by a thatched straw roof. The first Spaniards to visit the city were awestruck by the wealth of gold and silver inside the temple. It is said that the stone walls of the temple were lined with sheets of gold and that each recess housed idols and ritual objects superbly wrought from gold and silver. In the most sacred spot of the temple, the Inca had a solid gold disc hung on the wall to represent the sun god. To the right, lightning was portrayed, and to the left was the image of the Huiracocha deity, creator of the universe. From that moment on, the sun ceased to be an exclusive deity for the Incas and became the official religion of the entire empire. Oddly enough, Despite the fact the temple was dedicated to the worship of the sun, Pachacutec ordered his people to store the idols of all the conquered tribes inside the temple. This way, when a tribe had been annexed to the empire, its main idol was taken to Cusco and placed inside the Coricancha temple. There, the idol was respected and offered sacrifices. But they were also used for political ends, should a conquered tribe attempt to stir up rebellion. They were located in the order that they had been conquered, and one of the local chieftains had to remain there too. This meant that if there was a rebellion, both the idol and the chieftain would be punished. This quashed any threat of uprisings by tribes who feared their idol would receive severe punishment. This meant the Incas treated both the idols and leaders of conquered tribes as hostages. The sacrificial chamber of the Coricancha temple features a single granite block carved into 4 corners, symbolizing the 4 corners of the empire. The high priest would sacrifice a black llama on this block on feast days, beseeching the sun god to protect the Inca and the royal family. This chamber was also where the high priest would speak with the divinities of the heavens. Here, the priest would withdraw from the outside world to drink peculiar hallucinogenic brews until he fell in a trance, during which the sun god would speak through his mouth and herald the future. It was at times like these that the high priest, possessed by the spirit of the sun god, became a Wiyak Uma, literally a talking head. His words were sacred for the rulers of the Tawantinsuyo. Another of the temple's chambers was dedicated to the worship of the stars, which were believed to be the children of the sun and the moon. The walls were decorated with golden objects, while in the middle of the room there was a skylight through which the Incas could gaze upon the planet Venus, which they called Chasca, or the sun god's messenger. Here they could track the movement of the stars through the night sky. And thus it was they discovered some of the most important constellations and established distinctions between planets and stars. The chroniclers wrote that the window was richly decorated with gold and precious stones of varying sizes. These stones were so deeply embedded in the walls that the Spaniards had to smash the stone with iron hammers to rip out the treasures. In the years following the conquest, the Dominican priests who moved into the temple had the Inca walls lined with a thick layer of plaster, on which they painted religious motifs. Their intention was to make the natives forget the ancient significance of the temple. The plaster covered the great temple of the sun, but fell prey to the ravages of time. 5 centuries on, the colonial plasterwork has practically crumbled away. But the stonework is as solid as the day it was laid down by the Inca master builders. Beneath the towers and cloisters of the Santo Domingo convent, the Coricancha sleeps its eternal slumber. Its chambers are empty and silent now, but they still bear the memories of the days of glory of the Tawantinsuyo, when the Inca would stand in the main patio and fill this stone font with the sacred chicha beverage. This was done in the hope that his father, the sun god, would stop a while at midday to slake his thirst before continuing on his way. Cusco is the oldest living city on the American continent. It was born in an era that is impossible to pin a date on, and has flourished for centuries, maintaining its presence in the Andean world. Nestling amongst the Andes at 3,350 meters above sea level, Cusco already had a population of 200,000 inhabitants when the Spaniards first laid eyes on it in 1533. Its original name was allegedly Acamama, but was changed to Cusco when the Incas began to expand their empire, the Tawantinsuyo. The Inca rulers divided their empire into 4 sections and put in the center the city of Cusco, which in the Incas language means belly button of the earth. They called it so fittingly because Peru is long and narrow, like the human body. And that city lies almost exactly in the center. At the height of the empire, the Incas enhanced their city with dozens of temples, palaces, and ceremonial shrines. Solidly built, these constructions have withstood the ravages of time, and today represent the greatest legacy of this civilization. Today, anyone who visits Cusco will find so many constructions dating back to the Inca era that the inevitable question arises as to how long it took them to put together so many buildings. And who ordered them built? Most historians agree that the Inca Empire was governed by a succession of 14 rulers. However, most of these rulers belong to the world of legend and imagination, because there is little proof that they ever existed. From Manco Cápac to Huiracocha, the rulers were mythical figures, and only the last 5 rulers date back to a period of history where there was proof of their existence. The glory of the empire lasted a bare 100 years, and during that time, 3 of the most important rulers succeeded each other: Pachacútec, his son Tupac Yupanqui, and his grandson Huayna Cápac. All the constructions that one can see today, the legacy of the Incas, was built during the reign of these 3 rulers. A time known as the Golden Century of the Empire, which lasted from around 1430 to 1525. Pachacútec was the man who gave birth to the empire in a real sense. while Tupac Yupanqui conquered most of the Inca's territory, and Huayna Capac was the statesman who organized and gave shape to the empire. The chroniclers claim that Pachacutec was a gifted architect. While his son Tupac Yupanqui was busy extending the frontiers of the empire, Pachacutec set about designing the ramparts and ceremonial shrines that were to make the city of Cusco famous. His constructions were vast in scale and almost always were built for ritual purposes. Tambo Machay Springs, located just a few miles from downtown Cusco, were built around this time. They were part of a major temple where the Incas worshipped the water deity and where the rulers would rest during certain times of year. It is a typical construction of the imperial period, fitted with towering walls and stone window frames that were carved and polished with extraordinary skill. No one has managed to discover the source of these springs, but it is clear that they never run dry. All year long, the springs gush the same volume of water, which is always pure as the driven snow of the mountains above Cusco. Near Tambo Machay lies Kenco, another Inca temple, which was probably dedicated to the god of thunder. In the center of this spot, the Incas placed a large rock that was once carved into images of frogs and monkeys, but which was destroyed during the colonial era by priests bent on stamping out heathen idols. They aimed to leave nothing behind that could remind the natives of their ancient gods. This sacred stone is surrounded by a great semicircular wall that looks rather like an amphitheater, where religious ceremonies were held. It is said that the recesses held the mummified bodies of ancient Inca rulers or important nobility, which were always included in the rituals. The rocky outcrop above the temple was carved into hundreds of figures and stairways, as if a group of stonemasons had been trying out their skills, carving out complex shapes in the hard rock. In the upper reaches, one can see two protuberances that look rather like an Inca sundial. This solar clock, which the Incas called Intihuatana, enabled the high priests and astronomers to calculate the passage of time. Oddly enough, during the winter solstice, the first rays of sunlight that fall across Kenco shine directly on these rocks, forming a strange figure that looks for all the world like a puma with blazing eyes. Near the sundial runs a narrow canal, which probably channeled the chicha beverage or the blood of animal sacrifices during religious rites. The lower section of the canal divides into 3 smaller stretches. The high priests would then watch to see through which channel the blood flowed. If it flowed down the center, the priests took it to mean the gods were pleased with the sacrifice. But if the blood flowed down the other channels, it was taken as an ill omen of hard times ahead. A narrow passage hacked through the living rock runs underneath the temple, running down into the depths. This probably gave rise to the name Kenko, which means labyrinth. The passage leads to a mysterious underground chamber, which is a masterpiece of rock carving. It is as if the rock were a simple feat for the Inca stonemasons to shape in any way they wished, forming recesses, stairways, and a vast sacrificial altar. The ceremonial altar was used to embalm the bodies of nobles and other important figures. But evidence has also been found of human sacrifices, carried out in secret, in the depths of Kenko. The men who built these walls believed their kingdom to be eternal. They held the firm conviction that their people were chosen by the gods to rule the entire world. This is why they built Sacsayhuaman, to honor their gods and leave behind a testimony to their time on earth. In around 1450, Pachacutec Inca Yupanqui, the 9th of the Inca rulers, had his stonemasons begin the construction of a vast temple which he wished to be used to celebrate the victorious wars of conquest being waged by his son, Tupac Yupanqui. Thousands of workers brought from distant lands were pressed into service. And Pachacutec had his architects design a complex of chambers, ramparts, and towers on the green hills located north of Cusco. These constructions were also part of a plan to complete the design of the city of Cusco. Sacsayhuaman was to be the head of the city shaped like a feline, the capital of an empire. The workers started building the vast complex. But Pachacutec did not live to see it finished. It was Tupac Yupanqui, the 10th Inca ruler, who finished work on this temple that later would be taken for a fortress. In 1535, when the Spaniards had already overrun Cusco, Manco Inca, the ruler set up as a puppet emperor by the Spaniards, rebelled against Spanish rule and raised a huge army and held the city under siege for several months. After a series of bloody battles, the Incas were forced to retreat and entrench themselves inside Sacsayhuaman. There, the rebels held out for 3 weeks. And it was there that the valiant warrior Cawide died defending the last remaining tower at Sacsayhuaman. In the highest tower, the Indians had named as their captain a man so brave he could be compared to the Romans. He wielded a club with which he struck mortal blows at the Spaniards and the Indians who wished to surrender. He moved like a lion from one side to another. But in the end, when he saw that all was lost, he cast the club at the Christians and bit chunks of earth with indescribable grief. Then he threw himself off the highest part of the fortress so that he would not be vanquished. For the Spaniards who witnessed this battle, Sacsayhuaman was to go down in their memory as the fortress where the Indians mounted their resistance to Spanish rule, and it was described as such by the Spanish chroniclers. Only the locals were to know that it was a great temple, the place where the rebellion of Manco Inca was finally crushed. The patient work of historians and archaeologists in recent decades have revealed the true nature of Sacsayhuaman, an important temple dedicated to worshiping the sun god and other Andean deities. In its epoch of splendor, Cusco had no need of a fortress to defend the city, and the Incas did not tend to build them. Apart from their religious function, the chambers of Sacsayhuaman were used as storerooms for food, clothing, weapons, and even idols. When the Temple of the Sun, the Coricancha, was too small to house all the deities of the conquered tribes. Archaeological digs in the upper reaches of the complex revealed the foundations of the towers, of which the Spanish chroniclers wrote. It is believed that these towers were more than 50 feet high and were used as lookout posts to keep watch over the valley of Cusco. On the hill above Cusco lies a fortress of earth and stone with vast windows that look out over the city, and a main tower in the middle that had so many chambers that one man could not hope to see them all in a single day. From the first time that the conquerors saw the temple, they were stunned by the dimensions and beauty of Sacsayhuaman. They could not believe that a native people who knew neither the use of the wheel or iron could have built these vast walls with stone blocks that weighed over 100 tons and that had been fitted together without the use of mortar. The things the men saw and studied in detail made them imagine and believe that they were built with enchantments and built by demons rather than men, because the multitude of so many and such large stones caused much admiration. Like most constructions in the empire, the architecture of Sacsayhuaman stood out for two aspects. It was solid and featured simple lines. The austere personality of the Incas ruled out having any further decoration on their buildings, apart from the marvelous polished stones. Even though older civilizations such as Chavin or Tiahuanaco decorated their temples with sculptures and monoliths, the Incas preferred a more sober but lasting style in their architecture. This spot, known as the Inca's throne, located in front of the ramparts, is an example of the perfection which they achieved in their stonemasonry. A perfection which made any further decoration unnecessary. Seen in its entirety, it is like one great sculpture, a sculpture which, in my opinion, is the finest ever made, because it must have required a great deal of time to work the stone. This carving was done in diorite, which is a much harder stone than andesite or limestone, so they had to do some very fine work here. The Inca Museum in Cusco exhibits the tools used by the Incas, including bronze chisels of all sizes, and then the tools used to polish the stone, giving the finishing touch to the surface of all these carvings. Many still wonder whether there is any truth in the legend of a tunnel that runs from Sacsayhuamán to the Coricancha temple. It is said that a vast passage runs underneath the city, excavated to enable the Incas to flee if the city were endangered. It has never been proven, but the rock formations called Chincanas, which lie to the north of Sacsayhuamán, have fed the rumors over the years. Using a small microlight shaped like a condor, the expedition to Cusco flies above Sacsayhuamán to get some aerial shots. From here, one can see the three vast walls shaped in a zigzag, which support the terraces and platforms of the temple. Another question many ask themselves is whether the sharp-toothed shape of the walls has any special significance. Some historians believe the walls represent the god of lightning, an important deity for the Incas. Sacsayhuamán was built as a temple in honor of the god of lightning, representing the good lightning bolt that brings the rain and the evil lightning bolt that brings hailstorms. This vast stone circle, built to one side of the temple, was actually an artificial lake where religious rituals were held and where allegedly the Incas bid farewell to the dead, especially those who had been noteworthy. Recently, archaeologists have discovered near the ancient lake a large cemetery featuring 500-year-old tombs containing the remains of pottery and metallic ornaments that the women amongst the nobility used during the Inca era. It was the first time researchers were able to get a look at the tombs of the nobility of the Tawantinsuyo before the looters could get to them. These clothing pins, called tupus, were used by the women to fasten together their shawls. Here one can also see several lirpus, highly polished metal plates, which leading ladies of the time wore over their chest, exactly as portrayed in the drawings of native chronicler Huaman Poma de Ayala. Were these women chosen as virgins of the sun in the temple? Or were they the wives of powerful lords of the empire? Beneath its ancient stonework, Sacsayhuaman still guards many secrets. Each of the mountains and snow-clad peaks above Cusco has its own name. The locals recognize them from their size and shape and speak of them as if they were friends or relatives. For generations, the farming communities have lifted their gaze up to these towering mountains to beseech their protection or request permission to plant their fields. Despite the fact the church has struggled for centuries to get the natives to forget their ancient beliefs, not a single Cusco farmer would dare to plant crops without first offering his respects to the Pumahuanca, the Pitusidai, the Huaquehuilca, or any of the other mountains that lie closest to their village. At the foot of the mountains flows the Huilcamayu, the sacred river of the Incas, which in Spanish is called the Vilcanota. It is a gently flowing river, one which is generous to the land, and which during its gradual descent from the Andes down to the jungle forms a wide and sheltered valley. It is so fertile that the Incas held it to be a gift from the gods. Here, farming was intense, with fields planted from the riverbanks right up to the mountain summits. Here, the Incas designed and built terraces so as to take advantage of every inch of land. They planted crops according to the variations in temperature and altitude, with corn planted in the lower reaches, and potatoes, beans, and the quinoa grain planted higher up. Not a single hillside was left unplanted. The Incas turned the valley into an immense food storehouse for their people, especially corn, their finest crop. In the area between the town of Pisac and Machu Picchu, the Incas left behind so many agricultural terraces in full production that if they were to be used once again, it would solve the problem of food supply for all of southern Peru. But while the land was extraordinarily fertile, the Incas had to work hard to make the fields yield crops. The Sacred Valley is an example of the grit and determination of the ancient Peruvians, who, with only rustic plows and spades as tools, managed to produce enough food to feed their entire population, as well as providing enough food left over to use as a bargaining tool with other tribes. Pisac is a Quechua word that has no direct translation, although some believe it means partridge. However, its true meaning has been lost over the course of time. There are two places called Pisac in the Sacred Valley. One is perched high in the hills above the terraces, while the other nestles on the valley floor by the banks of the Vilcanota River. The Pisac, located high in the hills, was built 500 years ago by the Incas to administrate and control local food production. The Pisac on the valley floor is a former Spanish plantation where the natives were enslaved in forced labor during the mandate of Viceroy Toledo, who aimed to gather together all the Indians scattered around the valley to take better advantage of the labor force. The older Pisac is a marvel of agricultural technology. A mere glimpse is enough to imagine how much time and effort it must have taken the Incas to build this endless succession of terraces which reshaped the topography. The constructions are still intact today, right down to the steps which enabled farmers to get from one terrace to another. The housing section occupies a large section of the mountainside, looking out over the rest of the complex, while behind it lies the ancient cemetery of Tanganamarca. It is an impressive ravine where the Incas placed their dead, taking advantage of the porous quality of the rock. Like all farming areas, Pisac featured storehouses called colcas, where they stored the harvest before distributing the foodstuffs amongst the villages in the Cusco region. These storehouses are strategically located on the mountainsides where the winds gust day and night, guaranteeing the food was kept in good condition. And to keep people from stealing the food, the Incas set up several guard towers with armed guards who watched over the storerooms from above. The terraces could only produce crops when it rained. If the rains failed, there was no food. So the Incas constantly resorted to sacrifices and offerings to the earth goddess and mountain spirits, or apus, to send the rains. The Incas crossed into the religious sector of Pisac when they walked through this doorway, the Amaru Punku, or Gateway of the Serpent. The religious section is an impressive complex of chambers and patios built from arsenic rock, laid down and polished with extraordinary skill. Here, the high priests gathered to offer up sacrifices all year long, beseeching the miracle of the rains for their lands. life in the valley depended on the rains. And if drought threatened one year, the high priests could face terrible punishment for having failed to curry favor with the gods. The most sacred spot in Pisac was the Temple of the Sun, where the Intihuatana sundial stood. This stone was carefully oriented to the east to calculate the movement of the sun, to determine the agricultural cycle of planting and the harvest. The ancient Peruvians saw farming as vital to the development of their civilization. And in fact, agriculture was closely linked to their religious beliefs. All along the sacred valley, terraces and temples always stand close to each other. The men did the work, but the gods decided if the earth would yield crops that year. During the Inca era, the tampus were villages that stored large amounts of foodstuffs, and where travelers or armies during a campaign could rest. It is said that in those times, no one traveled for sheer pleasure or for their own business. Those who traveled the roads of the Inca Empire always did so on orders of their local chieftain or the Inca ruler himself to attend to state matters. The tampus provided lodging for travelers and were also administrative centers that controlled the local region. Ollantaytambo is one of the best preserved tampus left over from Inca times. The religious sector, which starts at the lower section of the complex, is sometimes taken to be a fortress. Here there are houses made from stone, mud brick, and straw. The dwellings of high priests and women chosen to serve the sun god. It is a peaceful place, featuring several ritual springs that at one time were probably used for religious ceremonies to render homage to the water deity. Each of these cascades that flow down carved channels feature their own characteristics and designs. But the finest of them is without a doubt the Fuente de la Ñusta, the Inca handmaiden's fountain, carved from a single stone and shaped like a doorway. To get to the heart of the religious quarter, one must climb a steep stone staircase that crosses 16 terraces that have been perfectly laid out in line with each other. Above them rears a superb complex of gateways and chambers carved from stone that make up one of the most remarkable examples of Inca architecture. It is a vast wall 20 meters long, featuring 10 recesses, marking the entry to the most sacred part of Ollantaytambo. We are now entering the sector of 10 windows, an important part of Ollantaytambo, which features these trapezoidal-shaped recesses, which were superbly worked. This work was certainly done in Inca times, probably under the reign of Inca Pachacutec. Each of these recesses corresponded to different sectors, where visitors or people entering the sacred area could leave their offerings. These 10 windows face north, looking out over the valley of Patacancha, one of the tributaries that flows into the Vilcanota River. As you can see, all of these structures have been polished and superbly finished. This architecture was undoubtedly of a ceremonial or religious nature. On this wall, one can see a series of strange knobs whose function has never been clearly explained. Some believe they were left by the stonemasons to show how much work they had to do to polish the stone. Others, however, believe they were spots where the workers tied ropes to tug and ease the stone blocks into place. Both theories are hard to believe. The true function of these protuberances, which can only be found in some of the stonework, is a secret that the architects of Ollantaytambo took to the grave. When one crosses through the wall of the 10 windows, one reaches the hilltop, which is site of the ruins of the Temple of the Sun. It is hard to describe the work of the ancient Peruvians. Only major willpower and absolute devotion to their gods could have led these men to carve these vast stone blocks to honor the Inti, their sun god. The 6 blocks of red porphyry stone that form this splendid wall stand just over 13 feet high and weigh an estimated 60 to 70 tons each. After putting them in place, the ancient architects shored them up with stone ledges that were wedged so tightly that they have not budged a millimeter in 5 centuries. Before the Spaniards arrived, the stones were decorated with geometric figures and carvings of sacred animals, notably a pair of pumas. All this work was smashed by the zealots, bent on stamping out the heathen idols. It is said construction work had still not finished on this temple by the time the Spaniards arrived. Around the wall lie scattered dozens of stone blocks that have already been cut and polished, waiting to be levered into position. Other blocks lie on ramps, apparently about to be raised. The temple was designed to be the largest and most luxurious construction in the Tawantinsuyo. Historians believe that thousands of men must have worked for decades here before construction work was halted. Many ask themselves from where these massive blocks were brought and how they were dragged up to the top of the hill. Nor is it clear which tools were used to cut the stone. The construction is so vast that some believe it was not made by human hand. However, there are clear signs of the work that went on. To one side of the main wall lies a large earthen ramp where hundreds of men must have dragged the stone blocks with ropes. Below the ramp lie several blocks that were dragged only halfway up. And further up on a hillside, 4 miles away, one can clearly see the quarry where the stone blocks were cut and then brought over. Those who doubt it was possible only have to climb the hill called Cachijata to find proof.
Lo que nosotros vemos, ¿no? Mira, observa aquí, es una piedra hermosa, ya casi acabado.
When one visits the quarry, which supplied the stone to build Ollantaytambo, one gets a clear idea of the vast amount of work involved for the Inca builders. To have stripped the stone blocks from this hillside and then drag them across to the site where they were working on the temple. From the quarry to Ollantaytambo is at least 4 miles, during which the workers had to cross the hills, over the river, and then drag the blocks up the other side to the exact spot where they wanted to place the blocks. The blocks, some as large as this one, easily weigh more than 20 tons. In Cachijata, there are hundreds of stone blocks that are cut and ready to be dragged over to Ollantaytambo, and many others that lie half-carved. But the most interesting stone blocks lie between the quarry and the temple. These stones were left along the way when construction work was suddenly suspended. These blocks are called weary stones by the local communities, who hold them in respect. There are 3 ways to get to Machu Picchu, the sacred city of the Incas. One is by train, as most visitors do, while others make the trip in a helicopter, which takes just 45 minutes. But the more adventurous hike to the citadel, like the ancient Peruvians did. The Inca Trail is the toughest of the 3 ways to get to Machu Picchu, but is without a doubt one of the best experiences a visitor could wish for. During the 15th century, when the empire pushed its limits across the land, the Incas built a vast network of roads that ran for more than 20,000 miles over the mountains, valleys, and plains of their vast territory. Some of these roads already existed before the Inca Empire came into existence, but the Incas had them widened, paved, and studded with bridges, food storehouses, and tambos, which were lodging for the Inca rulers' messengers. These roads were used to transport the Incas' armies, and later to herd the defeated tribes or mitmach, who were forced to work on the great construction projects of the empire. Where rivers blocked the way, the Incas built extraordinary hanging bridges, using only the quechua, the native grass of the highland plains. An example of these superb bridges can still be found over the Apurimac River, hanging 15 meters above the waters below. The bridge was called Quechua or Straw Bridge. And in fact, it is made entirely from this dried grass, without a single piece of metal or wood involved in its construction. It is not an easy thing to cross, as the bridge sways a fair deal with one's weight, but it is sturdy. It is said that in Inca times, the supporting ropes were as thick as a tree trunk, so that an entire army could cross the bridge with no problems. The road that leads to Machu Picchu leads down from the highlands at 3,600 meters to the balmy lands of the cloud forest, where the Urubamba River changes its name and becomes the Vilcanota. The remains of several tambos and temples are still visible along the way, although some of them have crumbled with time. Other buildings are in such good condition that their inhabitants appear to have left only recently. The mist is ever present, lending a ghostly aspect to the ancient Inca buildings. The names of some of these sites are closely linked to the mist, such as Fuyu Patamarca, which in Quechua means town floating above the clouds. As the trail heads deeper into the cloud forest, the waterfalls become more numerous, and the landscape blooms with a spectacular variety of orchids along the trail. The Inca builders worked hard on this road. Each of the stones and stairways have resisted nearly 5 centuries of shuffling feet, and are still firmly in place. The native bearers carrying cooking and camping gear for tourists pass by, practically running. Behind them, strolling at a more leisurely pace, come the visitors, tired but fascinated by this work of engineering, one of the finest of its kind. The Inca Trail does not branch off, but follows a fairly straight line to Machu Picchu, climbing straight over hill and dale. When the trail has to descend, it does so, and when it has to climb, it surges straight up the hillside, without sparing the walkers any effort. The network of roads built by the Incas through these mountains is a major feat of engineering, and also an excellent example of the Incas' skill in working the stone, like this stairway near the Fuyu Patamarca. These trails linked Cusco with Machu Picchu, but also linked cities as far apart as Cusco and the Ecuadorian capital of Quito. Messengers could cover the distance in 10 days, more or less the time it takes to get mail to one's destination today. This staircase has been carved out of the living rock, featuring steps that climb slowly up the hillside. These steps have been rounded off and carefully worked into the hillside. The climb looks breathtaking, but we're going to have a try. complex of Huayna, discovered by local archaeologist Julio Cesar Tello, is the final resting place before one reaches Machu Picchu. It is a complex of circular constructions built in classic imperial Inca style, where one can find temples, watchtowers, fountains, and dozens of chambers that were used to house the administrators who monitored food distribution. Like all highland towns, the roofs of the houses here were high and twin-eaved to channel away the torrential rains that fall nearly year-round. Even today, one can still spot the rocks that have been specially drilled and encrusted in the structure, where the Incas tied the support beams for the roofs, which had to ward off the stormy winds gusting through the area. Huayna was a major food production and storage center, especially staple crops that were grown in the warm climate of the cloud forest, such as fruit, ají chili peppers, peanuts, and coca leaf. A staircase that runs for 125 steps is the final challenge before reaching the Intipunku, the gateway of the sun that was the official entrance to Machu Picchu for messengers walking the Inca Trail. This final climb is enough to leave any hiker breathless. But the trek is rewarded by a rest with a spectacular view over the sacred city. Or at least, it would be a spectacular view if it wasn't a cloudy day. Then there is no remedy but to wait at the Intipunku for the sun to come out, listening to a rich mix of languages that one hears at 6 a.m. here any day of the year. Machu Picchu was the crowning work of the Incas, begun by Pachacutec at the end of his reign, and finished by his successors, his son Tupac Yupanqui and his grandson Huayna Capac. The greatest exponent of imperial Inca architecture, this city was both a holy sanctuary and an administrative center, designed to serve as a base from where the Incas planned to conquer the mysterious lands of the cloud forest. The citadel is divided into several well-defined sectors, starting with the agricultural sector, where one finds the terraces that run down the hillside like giant steps. The urban sector is made up of 3 main squares, flanked by large houses, while the sacred quarter features the Temple of the 3 Windows and the Temple of the Sun. At the highest part of the citadel lies the Intihuatana, or sundial, where the high priests would track the sun as it moved across the sky. Inside one of the sacred chambers lie 2 pools of water, which researchers believe were used to watch the eclipses. Machu Picchu is the most visited pre-Hispanic citadel on Earth. Not a single day goes by that the plazas and temples do not fill with visitors and echo to their voices. That's the view Peruvians have become used to today. But how would Machu Picchu have looked at the height of the Inca Empire? It was the sacred city of the Incas. Yet for nearly 400 years after the Spanish conquest, it was lost to the outside world until American professor Hiram Bingham stumbled upon it in 1911. Built in the 15th century, the complex of palaces and temples today echoes to the braying of pututo trumpets, calling the people together. In this reenactment of an ancient Inca ritual, the courtiers of the Capac Inca, the supreme ruler and held to be the direct descendant of the sun god, now gather in one of the plazas to celebrate the dawn of a new era. The sun has come full circle in its path across the sky, and it is time to make an offering to the earth goddess, the Pachamama, in the hope of bountiful harvests in the years to come. Speaking in the ancient Quechua language, the Inca now calls on his people to gather together so that they may be seen by the earth goddess. All of his people, those who live there, and those who come from far away. O great lords, sacred mountain spirits, we wish to render you homage. To Huayna Picchu, Putucusi, Machu Picchu, Salcantay. The Inca makes an offering to the earth of chicha, the sacred fermented maize beer used in pre-Hispanic rituals. The high priest now proclaims, Great Inca, O head who speaks, we bless the Mother Earth by making her a sacred offering. Bring me the leaves. We will offer this to Mother Nature. The high priest prepares the coca leaves, which he will offer to the earth and to the sacred mountain spirits, or apus. He will now proceed to burn the leaves. The high priest exclaims, Observe carefully. Lord Inca, I can read the future in the coca leaves, and it is a good omen. The leaves are burning, and the earth finds them sweet. We will have a good year. There will be abundant food. Let us rejoice. Let us celebrate. Good times are ahead. This is what I see. The earth will be fertile. There will be abundant food. I can see this. Let us rejoice. This is what I have seen, Lord Inca. The Inca is pleased by the news and says, I have heard you, High Priest. You have spoken well. You have seen the future. Let us rejoice then. All together, let us shout, Hai, or happiness. The Pututu trumpets sound once more. The Inca now proclaims, in this new era that is coming, let us be good to the earth. Let us give thanks to our Father, the Sun, who looks down on us from above. Happiness to all until next year. The Inca now withdraws from the ceremony to the sound of the Pututu trumpets. The virgins of the sun, the Akya, place their offerings to the earth goddess. The ritual has finished with a good omen.